Hi, boys and girls. Today we're going to read a fun story, but we are going to relate it to sharing your opinion. The story we're going to read today is called Grace for President. You may have read this story before, but I want you to really think about how people's opinions can affect leaders in our country or in the place where you are, in the school, in your country, in your town, in your city, wherever you are. There are really important leaders in your community that the community gets to choose. So, for example, in Baltimore City, where we live, there's going to be an election for the mayor on November 4th, 2020. Now, it's only May right now, but from now until May, all of the candidates or people who think they'll be a great mayor are asking people for their votes. For example, there are two parties in this country that are typically representing the types of leaders we have in our country. There's a Democratic Party and there's a Republican Party. And those two different parties have different types of leaders and different characteristics and ideals that they live by. So, if you are a person who's voting, you have to really do your evidence and research to look for the reasons of why you think that leader is the best leader. Because when you get to vote, you are sharing your opinion of who you think the best leader will be for the country. So, in Baltimore, in November, everybody has to vote for the mayor they think is the very best. From now until Baltimore, it's important for all the citizens who live in Baltimore who are older than 18 to get to vote for which candidate they think is going to be the best leader. For example, in the Democratic Party, there is 24 people right now who think they will be the best Democratic mayor for Baltimore City. For the other party, the Republican Party, there are 7 people who think that they will be the best leader. So it's really important for the candidates to be sharing the reasons why they think they're the best, so that everyone who's voting can listen to why they think they're the best too. I'm going to read a story for you today called Grace for President. In this story, Grace thinks that she can be the best president at her school, and she is going to go up against another candidate. In this story, there's just 2 candidates. But remember, in Baltimore, there is a lot of candidates who think that they would be the best leader, and it's really important to listen to their reasoning. In this story, I want you to listen to Grace's reasoning and her opponent, named Thomas, for their reasons of why you think they'd be the best president. Then, you're going to write for me your opinion of which character you think would be the best school leader. Listen closely to our story. I hope you enjoy. Grace for President. Grace for President. One Monday morning in September, Mrs. Barrington rolled out a big poster with all of the president's pictures on it. Grace Campbell could not believe her eyes. "Where are the girls?" That's what Grace said. "That is a very good question," said Mrs. Barrington. "The truth is, our country has never had a woman for president." "No girl president ever?" Grace asked. "No, I'm afraid not," said Mrs. Barrington. Grace sat at her desk and stewed. No girls? Who'd ever heard of such a crazy thing? Finally, she raised her hand. "Yes, Grace? I've been thinking it over, and I'd like to be president." Several students in the class laughed. "Well, I think that's a star-spangled idea, Grace," said Mrs. Barrington. "In fact, we can have our own election right here at Woodrow Wilson Elementary." The snickering in the room stopped. Grace smiled. "Would anyone else like to run for president?" Mrs. Barrington asked the class. Nobody else raised their hand. Becoming president was going to be easy, Grace thought. The next day, Mrs. Barrington made an announcement. "In the true name of democracy, I have invited Mrs. Waller's class to join our election. Their class has nominated Thomas Cobb to be the presidential candidate." Grace's heart sank. Thomas was the school spelling bee champion. His experiments always took a blue ribbon at the science fair, and he was the captain of the soccer team. Becoming president wasn't going to be as easy as Grace thought. Uh-oh, there's another candidate. The teachers put the names of all 50 states and the District of Columbia into a hat. Everyone except Grace and Thomas would get to choose a state. I'm Texas, said Anthony. I'm New Hampshire, said Rose. I'm Michigan, said Robbie. What does the number 17 mean? As you can see on his ticket, he has a number 17 on it. Each state is assigned a number of electoral votes. That number is determined by how many people live in that state, said Mrs. Barrington. Each of you will be a representative for your state. Altogether, our country has 538 electoral votes, said Mr. Waller explained. On election day, the candidate who receives 270 electoral votes or more wins the election. Why 270? asked Rose. That's more than half of all the electoral votes, said Mr. Waller. Becoming president really wasn't going to be so easy, Grace thought. Uh-oh. Grace came up with a campaign slogan. Make history, vote Grace Campbell for president. Thomas came up with his campaign slogan too. Vote for Thomas Cobb, the best man for the job. Grace listened to what issues were important to the students, and she made a list of campaign promises. Thomas made up his own list of promises. Grace made campaign posters and buttons. Thomas made posters and buttons too. As you can see, they both have their list posted of what they think would be more important as a leader. Wow, look at all these signs across the whole school. Each week, the teachers set aside time for the candidates to meet with their constituents. Constituents are the people who are voting for them. Polls were taken. Voters were making their choices. Now remember, each of their classmates and students are going to represent a state. So that will pretend that they're going to be presidents of the whole United States. Grace continued to campaign. At recess, she gave speeches. During lunch, she handed out free cupcakes. After school, she held rallies. Wow, look at all that hard work she's doing. This would be a great page to use for your reasoning of why you would want Grace to be president, if your opinion is that she should be president. Meanwhile, Thomas wasn't worried. He had cleverly calculated that the boys held slightly more electoral votes than the girls. At recess, Thomas studied his spelling words. During lunch, he worked on his latest science experiment. And after school, he played soccer. That's a little bit different than Grace. You could also use this page as evidence for your opinion if you think Thomas should be president. Even before the election, Grace made good on her promises. She joined the safety squad, she organized a school beautification committee, and she volunteered her time in the school cafeteria. Wow, she looks pretty tired in this picture, doesn't she? She's doing so much work for her campaign. Wow, the day has come. Look, here's our voting place. Up here it says special election. And up here is a scoreboard that has the votes for Thomas and Grace, right behind Grace. In early November, Woodrow Wilson Elementary hosted a special Election Day assembly. Grace and Thomas took their places on stage as the school band began to play. Henry was the first representative to approach the microphone. The Yellowhammer state of Alabama cast 9 electoral votes for Thomas Cobb. Then Fletcher said, the last frontier state of Alaska cast its 3 electoral votes for the best man for the job, Thomas Cobb. Hannah called out, the Grand Canyon state of Arizona cast its 10 electoral votes for Grace Campbell. And so it went. State after state after state cast their electoral votes. The scoreboard in the gymnasium kept track of the totals. The voting demonstration was quickly coming to an end. Clara approached the podium. The Badger state of Wisconsin cast its 10 votes for my best friend, Grace Campbell. Here's the scoreboard. Grace looked at the scoreboard. Thomas had 268 electoral votes. She had 267. There was only one state still unaccounted for, the state of Wyoming. What do you think's going to happen? Thomas grinned. Grace felt sick. Sam walked up to the microphone. He looked at Thomas. He looked at Grace. He looked down at Grace's handmade flag. Sam didn't say a word. What are you waiting for? Thomas whispered. The band stopped playing. All eyes were on Wyoming. Finally, Sam cleared his throat. The equality state of Wyoming casts its 3 electoral votes for... What do you think's going to happen? Grace Campbell! The gymnasium erupted in loud cheers and some boos. Mrs. Barrington approached the podium. With 270 electoral votes, the winner is Grace Campbell. Thomas looked stunned. Grace hugged Sam. Why did you do it? She asked. Sam handed Grace his flag. Because, he said, I thought you were the best person for the job. Wow, I really like how Sam shared his opinion with Grace at the end and used the word because. He's so great at sharing his opinion and casting his vote. The following week, the students in Mrs. Barrington's class were prepared for their career day presentations. Grace volunteered to go first. She stood at the front of the room and glanced at the posters still hanging on the wall. My name is Grace Campbell, and when I grow up, I'm going to be President of the United States. This time, everyone believed that she would. And here's a picture of her daydreaming, being a wonderful leader in our country. So, in your opinion, who would make the better president, Grace or Thomas? I want you to imagine you're a student in this class and you are one of the states. Who would you vote for? Would you vote for Grace or would you vote for Thomas? I want you to write me a sentence describing who you would vote for and why. Then I want you to use evidence from the text as one reason as why you think either Grace is the best candidate and who you would vote for or Thomas is the best candidate of who you would vote for. I want you to use evidence from this story and your own reasoning to tell me why your opinion is true. I hope you enjoyed our story today, and I can't wait to read your writing. Remember, you will tell me that I would vote for Grace because, and then tell me evidence from this story of why you would choose Grace. Or you would say, I would vote for Thomas because, and then provide me one sentence from the story of why you would vote for Thomas. You get to choose. It's your opinion. If you need to rewind the story to look for different reasons of why you would choose Grace or why you would choose Thomas, go ahead and rewind the video. But here's a few more examples of why you could vote for certain characters, either Thomas or Grace. Happy voting!